Chaton stopped the wagon, but he didn't get down right away. He just sat there, letting the silence do the talking. The kids knew. They always know first. He finally looked over, not at me, Ayana, but somewhere past my shoulder. "You'll stay here," he said. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just flat, empty, like a dry well. He climbed down from the wagon seat, his movements heavy. He grabbed our small bundle of clothes and just dropped it in the dust. He wouldn't look at my face. He couldn't. "The land is cursed," he mumbled. "Let it take you if it wants." Then he was back on the wagon. A single slap of the reins and the wheels started turning, rolling away from us, rolling out of our lives. The sound got smaller and smaller until it was just gone, swallowed by the wind. The silence that came after felt heavy, deliberate, like a coffin lid closing. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury we didn't have. But the children, Tala and Cone, they cried. Softly, the way kids do when they're trying not to make things any worse. I put a hand on each of their small, trembling shoulders and turned them to face our new home. The corral. The fences were crooked teeth in a dying mouth. The water trough was cracked and dry. The cabin looked like a stiff wind would turn it back into lumber. But it didn't matter. "This is where we start," I whispered. My own voice cracked on the last word. I shoved the cabin door with my shoulder. It groaned open. Inside, the floor was a mess of old straw and shattered glass. I kicked a small space clear in the corner, laid down our only blanket, and told the children to sit. As I turned, my eyes caught something against the far wall. A basket, made of woven willow. The handle was cracked, but the weaving was tight. It was the kind my mother used to carry, back when the creek still ran full and she'd gather herbs. I picked it up, wiping the dust away with the hem of my skirt. I set it down next to the children. It would hold what we had left: a half loaf of bread, one tin cup, two small shirts that were already too small. It wasn't much, but it was everything. While the kids nibbled on the bread, I went outside to find anything that would burn. Dry twigs, brittle stalks of grass, anything. I struck the flint, shielded the spark with my hands, and prayed for a flame. It was a weak fire, but it was something. It pushed back the shadows and gave the children something to look at besides the emptiness. When the flames were steady, I sat with them. We didn't speak. Cone, my boy, finally broke the silence. "Is father coming back?" I looked into his wide, hopeful eyes, and I lied. "Yes," I said, because the truth was a stone too heavy for a child to carry in the dark. After they drifted off to sleep, their bellies half full and their dreams probably full of monsters, I walked out behind the corral, to the well. It was covered with heavy stones and a tangle of dead weeds, like the land was trying to hide a wound. I shoved the stones aside, my muscles straining. I leaned over the dark opening. The blackness inside felt like it went on forever. I found a short piece of frayed rope near the fence, a ghost of some past work. I lowered it down into the dark, my heart pounding in my ears. I kept feeding it down, down, down. Finally, I felt the slightest change in weight. I pulled it back up, hand over hand. The end of the rope was dark. It was wet. Water. I smiled, a real smile, and it felt strange on my face. Water meant the ground hadn't given up completely. It meant the ground was still listening. I pressed my palm flat against the cold stone of the well's rim. "If this land remembers pain," I whispered into the darkness, "it will remember care." My breath made a small cloud in the cold air. For a second I felt like the words weren't just mine, like I was repeating something the stones already knew. And then I heard it. A sound from deep inside the well. A faint scrape. A shift, not an echo. Not the water. Something else moved down there. It was so quiet I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Quickly, I pushed the heavy stones back over the opening, hiding its secret. Hiding my secret. I went back to the cabin and sat by the fire, watching the embers glow until the first hint of dawn broke through the cracks in the roof. Everything was broken. Everything was lost. But the air felt different now, like it was holding its breath, waiting for my next move. I picked up the old willow basket, brushed the night's ash from its rim, and set it again, this time to the rising sun. We begin here. The words didn't fade. They settled into the bones of that broken cabin, like a promise the land itself had decided to keep. The next morning I was up before the children. The fire was dead ash, but I could still smell the smoke in the air. A ghost of warmth. I went straight to the well. The stones were cold, damp with morning dew. I knelt, tied our 1 tin cup to that frayed piece of rope, and started lowering it into the dark. I counted the turns of rope in my hand. 10, 20, 30. It felt deeper than it had last night. Finally, a soft, distant splash. I pulled it up, slowly, carefully. The first few drops of cold water that spilled over the side onto my fingers felt like an answer. I gave the children a drink before I took one myself. The water was cold and tasted of iron and deep earth. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. It was enough. That day I started to hunt, not for animals, but for anything useful this place had left behind. I found the splintered handle of a hoe, a small coil of rusted wire, a cracked clay pot, half buried near the fence line, a piece of torn canvas that could cover the gaping hole that was once a window. I gathered everything in the willow basket. Each broken thing felt like a treasure. Each piece was proof that we could still build. The children trailed behind me, quiet, their eyes watching everything I did. I gave them jobs: gather small sticks, find smooth, flat stones, use a branch to sweep the dirt floor clean. I didn't talk much. I just showed them. The rhythm of the work became our new language. It was better than talking about what we'd lost. At midday, we sat in the thin shade of the broken corral fence. I took out the last piece of bread. I broke it into 3 pieces. And I smiled a real smile when both children insisted I take the bigger piece. Tomorrow, I told them, my voice stronger than I felt, we'll eat better. I didn't know how, but I needed to say it. I needed them to hear it. In the afternoon, I walked toward the low ridge behind the cabin, where the grass grew a little thicker. I was hunting for herbs. My mother had taught me. I recognized the sharp, clean smell of wild sage. She used to say sage keeps sickness and sadness out of a house. I cut the stems carefully, my fingers remembering the motions. I filled the willow basket until it was heavy with green, fragrant life. Back at the cabin, I tied the sage into small bundles and hung them over the doorway. The whole broken room filled with the scent. It smelled like hope. That night I built the fire outside. After the children were asleep on their blanket, I threw a handful of the dried sage into the flames. I let the thick, white smoke drift over them. It wasn't a ceremony. It was a promise. Gratitude. Before I went to sleep myself, I sat with the willow basket in my lap. I found some thin, strong strands of bark and began to carefully mend the cracked handle. My mother's words came back to me. You repair what still has use. You don't curse what can be mended. The handle was getting stronger with every rap. As I worked, the wind changed. It was coming from the west now, and it carried the smell of distant rain. I didn't believe in miracles, but I believed in signs. And this was a sign. I looked over at the well one last time before going inside. The stones seemed different now, less like a scar on the land and more like a sealed mouth holding a secret. I felt a pull toward it. That sound I'd heard. It wasn't my imagination. Something was down there, something more than water. I went back inside and sat by the door, the mended basket next to me. A single drop of rain hit the dusty ground outside, then another. I didn't move. I just let the clean, cool rain wash the world. In the distance, a low rumble of thunder sounded, not like a threat, but like a drumbeat, a reminder. Tomorrow I would walk to the agency post, see what I could trade the sage for. But tonight, I whispered out into the rainy darkness, toward the well. We will take care of you if you take care of us. The night took my words and carried them deep into the earth. Inside, the children slept soundly, and the willow basket sat by the dying fire, its handle now strong, waiting to be filled again. 3 days after the rain, I saw him, a shape on the horizon, moving slow and steady, the kind of slow that comes from knowing the land, not fighting it. I watched as the shape grew clearer. An old man leading a skinny gray mule. He stopped a few yards from the corral. He didn't speak. He just raised a hand, palm open, a greeting of peace. "Ayana," he said. His voice was soft, like he was pulling my name out of the air. I hadn't heard my own name spoken with kindness in a long, long time. The children peeked out from behind my skirt, their fear mixed with curiosity. The old man's hair was long and white, braided with strips of dark leather. "Matau," he said, tapping his own chest. The name felt familiar, like a word the wind had whispered before. He was a hunter, they used to say, back when there were buffalo to hunt. Now he just herded a few goats on the ridge, living on memory and trade. He looked around, his eyes taking in everything. The mended fence post, the half-patched roof, the bundles of sage hanging over my door. "You've chosen the hardest ground," he said. It wasn't a judgment, just a fact. I nodded. It chose me. A slow smile spread across his weathered face, showing the gaps where teeth used to be. "Then you'll do well," he said. "Hard ground doesn't lie." He walked the perimeter of the corral, his eyes missing nothing. When he saw the children's small bare footprints in the damp earth near the well, he grunted, a sound of approval. "Water that listens to the feet of children will never run dry," he said. He turned to his mule and unstrapped a small cloth sack. He handed it to me. Inside there were beans and a small hard block of salt. But there was something else tied to the mule. Something alive. An old nanny goat, her coat patchy, her eyes calm and patient. "Her name is Ashki," he said. "She's old, like me, but she still gives." I was speechless. He pressed the goat's rope into my hand. "Feed her kindness," he added, his eyes serious. "Not pity. The milk will know the difference." The children reached out and touched the goat's warm, coarse fur, their faces full of wonder. That night, Matau sat by our fire. He ate the bean stew I made, slowly, chewing each bite like it held a story. And he told stories, in the long silences between the crackling of the flames. He spoke of a time before the fences, when the rivers ran clear and the people followed the herds. A time when no one ever called the land cursed. He showed me which grasses were best for the goat, how to check her hooves for stones. He pointed out a small flowering weed. "Mix this in her water," he said. "It keeps the milk sweet." "Everything that lives is a teacher," he said, his gaze lost in the fire. "Even the things that die." After the children had fallen asleep, he leaned in, his voice low. "Your husband. He doesn't understand this place. He fears what doesn't answer him quickly. The earth doesn't curse us, Ayana. It waits. It tests." I listened, saying nothing. I knew he was right. As he was getting ready to leave the next morning, just as the sun was touching the horizon, he pointed to my willow basket, which sat by the door. "Keep filling it," he said. "When it stays full, you'll know the curse was only ever hunger." He climbed onto his mule and rode away, back toward the rising sun. The goat, Ashki, bleated once, a soft sound like she was agreeing with him. Later that day, I milked Ashki for the very first time. The stream of milk was thin, hesitant, but it was warm, and it filled our tin cup with a promise that was bigger than the cup itself. I gave it to Tala and Cone first. I watched them drink, their eyes closing with the simple pleasure of it, and I felt something inside my chest shift. It wasn't pride, it wasn't even relief. It was the quiet understanding that new beginnings often come in small, tired packages. That evening, I sat by the well, stroking Ashki's neck as she chewed her cud. "You're part of us now," I whispered. The wind seemed to catch the words and carry them over the hills, toward where Matau had gone. For the first time, the broken corral didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a plan. But as the sun went down, a new, cold thought entered my mind. Matau had looked at the well, and his eyes held a secret. He knew what was down there, and he was waiting to see what I would do about it. Winter came without snow, but it brought a cold that bit deep. The frost on the ground was a white sheet every morning, and the nights were so long and quiet you could hear the stars breathing. I was up before the sun each day, light the fire, check on Ashki in her lean-to shelter, carry water from the well, my willow basket balanced on my hip, filled with firewood. Ashki's belly had grown round and heavy. Matau had told me she would kid before the next moon, and so far Matau had been right about everything. On the fourth night of the coldest week, a sound from outside woke me. A soft cry, not of pain, but of struggle. I grabbed our blanket and ran out into the freezing dark. Ashki was lying in the straw, her body trembling with effort. The stars overhead were like chips of ice. I knelt beside her, whispering the things Matau had told me. Stories of how the earth helps the mothers who are brave. I rubbed her neck, matching my breathing to hers. I waited. It didn't take long. A small, glistening body slid free into the straw. It was weak, searching for its first breath. Then its tiny legs kicked, once, twice, and it let out a high, fragile bleat that cut right through the frozen silence of the night. The children came running from the cabin, woken by the sound. "What is it?" Tala whispered, her voice shaking with cold and excitement. I lifted the newborn into my hands. I could feel its tiny, frantic heartbeat against my palms. It was so fast, so alive. "A daughter," I said, my voice thick. Cone reached out a small finger and touched its wet ear. He smiled, a real, wide smile, the first I'd seen on his face since his father drove away. "She's ours?" he asked. I nodded. "She belongs to this land," I said, "just like us." We cleaned the newborn with a piece of old cloth and helped her find her mother's milk. We watched until she stood, wobbly but determined, on her own 4 skinny legs. "Spirit," I said. The name just came to me, as if the ground itself had whispered it on the wind. From that night on, the corral didn't feel empty anymore. The sound of Spirit's bleating was the first thing we heard every morning. It was a new rhythm, a new heartbeat for this place. I started saving every drop of extra milk Ashki gave. I mixed in the herbs Matau had shown me. I stored the milk in the cracked clay pot, keeping it cool in the shade by the well. I waited. When the first white curd separated from the whey, I almost couldn't believe it. I tasted it. It was rich, salty, and better than anything we had eaten in months. I gave some to the children. Their eyes went wide with surprise. I laughed. Our willow basket, which once held only our last scraps, was now holding food we had made with our own hands, from our own goat, on our own land. A few days later, a trader from the agency post stopped by. He was on his way to the fort. I offered him a small round of cheese, wrapped in leaves the way Matau had described. He looked at it suspiciously. He turned it over in his rough hands, sniffed it, and finally he placed 2 silver coins on the rough wood of the fence post. It wasn't much, But it was more money than I had held in my hand in over a year. With those 2 coins, I bought 3 scrawny hens and a small bag of corn seed from him. That night I sat by the fire, turning the coins over and over in my palm, not because of what they could buy, but because they were proof that I could turn pity into work, that I could turn ruin into life. The goats slept by the cabin door, Spirit curled up against her mother. The wind whispered through the posts of the corral. It wasn't howling anymore. It was humming. I looked at my sleeping children, their faces soft in the firelight, and I whispered, "We will never be hungry again." The words didn't feel like a wish this time. They felt like a contract the earth had already signed. But as I held the coins, I felt a strange coldness to them. The trader. His eyes had lingered on the well a moment too long. It was the same look Matau had, a look of knowing. These men, they weren't just passing by. They were watching, waiting. And I was starting to think the curse wasn't hunger at all. It was a secret, and I was living right on top of it. Spring arrived slowly, cautiously, as if the land was testing the air before it committed to living again. The frost melted away. Tiny patches of green appeared around the well. The sound of the water, when I drew it, seemed stronger, happier. I used the longer days to work, mending the last of the fences, gathering herbs to trade. The hens started laying small brown eggs. Spirit grew strong and playful. Milk was a part of every meal. But I knew we couldn't survive on just what we made. We needed to trade. We needed the world outside this corral. I tied my hair back with a leather strip, filled the willow basket with rounds of cheese wrapped in leaves and sage, and started the 10-mile walk to the trading post. The children walked with me, their small hands in mine. The agency store was a sad, dusty place. A few barrels, some empty shelves. A man behind the counter barely looked up when we came in. He was about to dismiss us when a voice called out from the back room, "Let them be." A woman stepped into the light. Her hair was the color of rich soil, and her dress was a strange mix of mission cloth and intricate tribal beadwork. She moved with a purpose that the tired store lacked. "I'm Wahila," she said. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "You're the woman from the ridge, from the cursed corral." I just nodded, holding out the basket. I unwrapped one of the cheeses. Wahila took it. She didn't just look at it, she studied it. The way the leaves were wrapped, the small braid of sage I had tied around it as a simple decoration. She broke off a small piece and tasted it, her eyes closing for a moment. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. "This is clean," she said. "Good. You made this." I nodded again. Wahila called the man over from the counter. "This woman's cheese is better than the dry bricks we get from the fort," she told him. The man grumbled, weighed the cheese on a rusty scale, and slid 2 coins toward me. Wahila put her hand down, stopping his. "It's worth 5, she said, her voice firm. The man scowled, but he recounted and pushed 5 silver coins across the counter. After he shuffled away, Wahila turned back to me. "You need fair trade," she said, "not charity. Bring more next week. And every time you bring it, use that sage braid. It's your mark." She looked me right in the eye. "It's important that people know it comes from you." I thanked her, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She spoke like someone who understood both sides of the counter. Over the next few weeks, I learned she did. Wahila taught me how to weigh goods, how to use marks in a ledger to track trades, how to say no to a bad offer without making an enemy. "Men talk about value," she told me once, dipping her pen in an inkwell. "But women know what something is worth. They just need to learn to write it down." I was a fast learner. Every cheese I made was wrapped in leaves and tied with my signature braid of sage. Soon, when Wahila took me to the bigger market at the fort, People were already talking. They called me the woman from the cursed corral who sells blessings in a basket. Wahila just laughed. "Let them talk," she said. "Talk travels faster than a wagon." With every trip, I came home with more than just coins. I brought back salt, beans, fabric for new clothes for the children. I bought a small blank notebook. I couldn't read the words, but Wahila was teaching me my numbers. Every night I practiced the marks she showed me, scratching them in the dirt with a stick until they made sense in my head. The willow basket was always there, carrying the proof of our progress. Wahila was more than a partner. She was a bridge between my broken-down corral and the world outside. On the last day of spring, I came home with enough money to buy real seed for a garden, and a promise from Wahila to buy twice as much cheese next time. The corral was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of chickens, a growing goat, and the happy chatter of my children. That night, as I sat by the fire, I touched the willow basket. "We're learning the language of the world," I whispered to it, "one trade at a time." But a cold question kept nagging at me. Why was my little braid of sage so important to Wahila? It was just a decoration, an herb. Unless it wasn't. Unless it was a symbol for something else. A message that I was sending without even knowing it. The summer came on like a fever, hot, angry, and relentless. By the end of June, the grass was the color of old bones. The creek was just a dry, cracked scar on the land. And the wind, it didn't bring relief. It just moved the heat around. I watched the land suffer. The hens laid fewer eggs. Spirit's milk started to thin. The very air seemed to vibrate with thirst. Wahila sent a message from the post. The fort was rationing water. It was a warning. But I wouldn't stop. I couldn't. Every morning I measured the water in the well, counting the buckets, teaching the children that every single drop mattered. "Every cup has a story," I told them. "We're drinking what the earth remembers." But the buckets were getting lighter. The rope was coming up dry sooner. One morning I saw Ashki, my old goat, stumble. Her steps were unsteady. That's when I knew I had to do something more. I walked to the ridge where Matau kept his small herd. He was sitting in the thin shade of a dying cottonwood tree, his mule standing patiently by his side. "The well is fading," I said. No need for pleasantries. He nodded, his eyes sad, like he had been expecting my words. "Then you must make it remember you again," he said. He looked right at me. "Dig. Dig until it knows you will not leave." He stood up, went to his mule, and came back with a worn, sturdy shovel. He pressed it into my hands. "The drought is a test, Ayana," he said, his voice low and serious. "Not of your strength, but of your promise." That night the sky was a sick, dusty orange. I gathered the few neighbors who still clung to life on this ridge. 3 other women, their faces etched with worry. A boy too young for a beard, but with old eyes, and Suni, a widow who had buried her husband in this hard ground last year. We stood around the well. No one spoke. We just started to dig. The sound of metal hitting dry, baked earth echoed in the unnatural quiet. My hands, soft from milking and weaving, were raw in minutes. Blisters formed, broke, and bled, the blood mixing with the dust. But I kept digging. The children carried the rocks away in their baskets. Suni used our precious water to pour over the tools, just to keep the dust from choking us. By morning we were deeper than the well had ever been, and there was nothing, just more dry earth. We rested for a few hours in the blistering heat, and then we started again. On the second night, under a sliver of a moon, my shovel hit something. It wasn't the dull thud of rock or the soft scrape of clay. It was a sharp, loud crack. Wood. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear against the ground. I could feel a faint vibration, a low hum, a hidden breath deep under the earth. I grabbed the shovel and struck again, right where I'd heard the sound. A thin, dark line of moisture seeped out between two old, buried planks. Water. The others gasped, too exhausted to cheer. I reached down, my fingers digging into the cool, damp earth. I scooped up a handful of mud and water and brought it to my lips. It was cold. It was clean. It tasted like the heart of the world. I tilted my head back, the muddy water dripping down my chin, and I whispered to the sky, "You remember?" By sunrise, the well was flowing again. We had broken through to something deeper, an old spring, long forgotten. We built a new pulley system from strong branches, tied a new rope, and lined the rim with the smooth stones the children had gathered. I called everyone together. "No one owns this water," I said, my voice hoarse but strong. "We share it, we guard it, and it will guard us." They all nodded. They understood. 2 days later, Wahila rode out from the post. When she saw the fresh, dark earth around the well and the full buckets, her eyes went wide. "You dug into the earth's heart," she said in awe. I just smiled, a tired, dusty smile. "No," I answered. "We just reminded it of ours." In the weeks that followed, the drought raged on, but our corral became an oasis. People came, strangers, families from other ridges. They came with empty buckets, and they left with full ones. I never counted the buckets. I counted the faces. Every drop of water we shared was proof. Proof that care, not fear, was the only thing that could make this land live again. As autumn approached, the first green shoots of grass started to push up around the water trough. The land had survived, and so had we. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me even in the heat that we hadn't just found water. We had found a secret, and that the curse on this land wasn't about a lack of rain. It was about something buried, something someone had tried very hard to hide. The drought broke the way a fever does. All at once, the rains came one afternoon, soft at first, then a downpour that turned the dust to thick, hungry mud. People still came to our well, the one we had dug back to life. They came with their buckets, their eyes full of a quiet gratitude that was better than any coin. I shared the water freely. "The well keeps us alive," I'd say, "but only if we keep each other alive." One day a woman came who I didn't know. She was young, her hair in a single messy braid, her dress torn from a long journey. A small child, no older than 3, was clinging to her hip, his face buried in her shoulder. They were both soaked to the bone from the rain. She stood before me, not begging, just exhausted. "I am Suni," she said. "I came from the Rosebud. My husband. The sickness took him. We walked until we heard there was water here. Ayana. My name." She knew my name. I nodded toward the fire pit, where a small flame was sputtering in the rain. "You can stay," I said. "Rest until you find your place." But Suni didn't leave. The next day, she was helping me patch a hole in the cabin roof. The day after, she was carrying water for the goats. She worked without being asked, her movements quick and efficient, her silence comfortable. One night, as we sat by the fire, the children sleeping soundly inside, I asked her, "You're not planning on leaving, are you?" She looked up from the basket she was mending and shook her head. "There is no place else to go," she said softly, "and no other place that feels like it's still breathing." I understood that. From that day on, we were a team. Suni's hands were fast, her back was strong, and her spirit was quiet but unbreakable. We cleaned out the old, dilapidated smokehouse that Matau had helped me build before the drought. We turned it into a proper cheese house, a place to cure and store our rounds of goat cheese. We gathered wild mint and sage after the rains, hanging them from the rafters until the air was thick with the smell of healing. Wahila started bringing buyers directly from the fort. They wanted our cheese, but they also wanted our herbs, and the strong lye soap Suni had learned to make. I refused to raise the price too high. "We're not selling survival," I told Wahila. "We're sharing it." Suni laughed when she heard me say that. "You're starting to sound just like Matau," she said. I didn't deny it. Our little world began to turn with a new rhythm. Tala helped wrap the cheeses. Cone, my son, learned the numbers and marks Wahila had taught me, keeping his own small ledger on a piece of slate. The work gave all of us a reason to get up in the morning. Soon other women started to visit. Widows, wives whose husbands had gone looking for work and never came back. They were curious. They wanted to learn. I taught them how to make soap from ash and goat fat. Suni showed them how to weave the willow shoots into strong, tight baskets. The corral, once a symbol of abandonment, became a workshop. It was always full of movement, the sound of women talking, laughing, working. The children started calling it the Hands Place. One evening, as the setting sun painted the clouds orange and purple, Suni was cleaning the stone rim of the well. She looked over at me and said, her voice quiet, "You know, he would never believe this, if he saw it." I didn't have to ask who he was. Chaiton. "Oh, he'll see it," I said, my voice steady. "But by then it won't matter." We both smiled, a small, tired smile that passes between women who have learned to trust the work of their own hands more than the promises of men. That night, the sound of laughter from our corral carried all the way to the ridge where Matau's goats grazed. It was like the land itself was finally happy. We weren't just a family anymore. We were becoming a community, a circle of women, building a life out of what a man had thrown away. I reached for my old willow basket, its sides stained dark from use, its handle strong from my repairs. I whispered to it, "We're not just surviving anymore. We're living." The words didn't echo in the big, empty plains. They stayed right there, warm and solid, like the light from our fire that refused to be put out. But Suni, my new friend, she had a secret. I could see it in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. She wasn't just a widow looking for water. She was here for a reason, and I was beginning to think it had something to do with the secret still buried deep beneath our feet. 5 years. 5 years went by before I saw his shadow on that ridge again. By then, the corral was unrecognizable. The fences were straight and strong. Baskets filled with herbs and cheeses hung from hooks by every door. A steady curl of smoke rose from the smokehouse, and the air was filled with the sound of women's laughter and children playing. I was at the well, drawing the morning water, when I saw him. A lone rider slumped in the saddle, moving with the hesitation of a man who knows he isn't welcome. The horse was bone-thin. The man was thinner. But I knew the shape of his shoulders. I would know them anywhere. Chaitin. He stopped his horse at the edge of our land. He just sat there, staring. My children, Tala and Cone, now tall and strong, came and stood behind me. Their faces were hard, wary. It was like the whole world had gone quiet, waiting to see what I would do. He slid off his horse, his legs unsteady. He almost fell. That's when I saw how much the world had chewed him up and spit him out. His face was a roadmap of regret. His hands were shaking. You did this?" he stammered, his eyes wide, looking at the thriving homestead. It was like the land had betrayed him by daring to live without him. "You kept all this alive?" I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in 5 years. "We didn't keep it alive," I said, my voice cold and clear. "We brought it back to life." He took a hesitant step closer, but stopped at the fence line, like he knew he couldn't cross it. He dropped his gaze to the dust. "I was wrong," he choked out. "About the land, about the curse, about you." He swallowed hard. I thought this place hated me, so I decided to hate it back. It took losing everything for me to learn. His voice broke. I came to ask for your forgiveness. The wind blew, carrying the smell of baking bread and curing cheese from the smokehouse. For a long moment I said nothing. My children stood behind me like two stone pillars. Finally I turned to Cone. "Bring him some water," I said. My son looked at me, his eyes questioning, but he obeyed. He filled the tin cup from the bucket and handed it to his father. Chaiton took it, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold it. He drank like a man who hadn't seen clean water in weeks. "You can rest here for the night," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the storm that was raging inside me. "There's food by the fire, but when the sun comes up, you ride on. This is not your home anymore." Tears filled his eyes. I saw a flicker of the man I once loved before the bitterness hollowed him out. "You're right," he whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." I looked at him, not with pity, but with a hard-earned clarity. "Then you should start looking for the place where you left yourself," I told him. He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of all the things I wasn't saying. That night he sat by a small fire we built for him outside the corral fence. He was wrapped in a blanket Suni had given him. I watched him from the cabin doorway. He barely ate. He just stared into the flames, like they were putting him on trial. Just before dawn, I saw him get up. He placed the empty tin cup carefully on the rim of the well. Then he turned and walked away toward the dark horizon. He didn't look back. When the sun rose, the only thing left of him was a set of footprints in the dust, already starting to fade. I stood where he had stood. "Go in peace," I whispered to the wind, "but do not come back empty again." I turned back to the cabin. Suni was standing in the doorway, watching me. "He's gone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied, "and now the curse has gone with him." That day the work continued just like any other day, but the air felt different, lighter. A space had been cleared. When Wahila visited that evening, she noticed it right away. "You look different," she said. "Lighter." I managed a small smile. "Forgiveness is a heavy burden," I told her. "Right up until you give it away." That night I placed my old willow basket by the fire, filling it with goods for the next day's market. The same basket that once held our very last scraps of food. Now it carried the bounty of a community, the work of many hands. Proof that nothing sacred had ever truly left this ground. It had just been waiting, waiting for the right hands to care for it. By the next spring, our well was more than just a place to get water. It was the heart of our community. It was a landmark. People told stories about it, stories about the women of the cursed corral who had made the earth remember how to live. Word of our success traveled, carried by traders and travelers, until it reached the tribal council. One morning a messenger arrived. The elders, he said, requested my presence at the spring fair. They wanted me to speak, to tell the story of how we had rebuilt this place. I hesitated. I was a worker, a mother, not a storyteller. But Wahila put her hand on my shoulder. "You gave this land back its name, Ayana," she said firmly. "It's time you taught others what that means." The days leading up to the fair were a flurry of activity. The children polished baskets until they shone. Suni carefully wrapped hundreds of cheeses in fresh leaves. Even old Matau, his hands now gnarled with age but his spirit as strong as ever, carved new wooden handles for our cheese molds. When the day came, we loaded a small wagon and followed the trail toward the river meadows. The fair was a sea of life. Tents and stalls stretched as far as I could see. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and cedar smoke. The sound of a dozen different drums beat like a single powerful heart. People were everywhere. Families from the ridge, traders from the fort, soldiers' wives looking to barter for fresh goods. Wahila helped us find a spot for our table under a huge cottonwood tree. I arranged our willow baskets in neat rows. Each one was a testament to our work. Rounds of cheese, bars of soap tied with twine, bundles of dried herbs sealed in cloth pouches. My children stood beside me, their chests puffed out with pride, explaining to customers how the cheese was made. Then I saw Matao making his way through the crowd, leaning on a carved staff. The people parted for him, a path of respect opening before him. He stopped at our table. "This," he announced, his voice rough and loud enough for everyone to hear, "is the woman I told you about, the one who taught dead ground how to live again." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. It wasn't loud or wild, it was steady, honest. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. I wasn't used to being the center of attention. Wahila leaned close. "When they ask you to speak," she whispered, "just tell them the truth. Nothing else." Soon, the council elder, a man with a kind face and long white braids, called my name. The crowd went quiet. The drums stopped. I walked forward, my palms sweating, my heart beating a steady, nervous rhythm. I stood before them all, and I just spoke. "They said no woman could bring life back to cursed land," I began, my voice clearer than I expected. "But the land was never cursed. It was just forgotten. It was waiting for someone to listen." I paused, my voice catching for a second. "When my husband left us here, I thought the earth hated me. I thought every day of work was a punishment, but every time I dug my hands into the dirt, it gave something back. First water, then grass, then milk, then a community." I looked out at the faces in the crowd. Forgiveness doesn't fall from the sky. It grows from the ground, but only if you plant care. I held up my old, battered willow basket, the first thing I had found in that broken cabin. "This basket once held our last meal," I said. "Now it holds the work of many hands. That is what healing looks like." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then a single drum began a slow, deep beat. Another joined in, and then another, until the whole meadow was filled with the sound. People surged forward, not just to buy our goods, but to touch my hand, to thank me, to share their own stories of hardship and hope. Wahila was smiling, her eyes shining. Matau leaned close to me and said, "When the wells run dry again someday, they will remember who taught them how to dig." I looked at all the people, the traders, the widows, the children, and I felt something settle deep inside me, a peace that was stronger than pride. That night, after the fair was over and the campfires glowed like fallen stars across the meadow, I sat by our wagon. We had sold almost everything, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that the story was no longer just mine. It belonged to the land, to the well, to the people. It was one story now. I closed my eyes, listening to the faint, steady drumming that still carried on the night air. "We kept our promise," I whispered, and the heartbeat of the drums answered me back. Years passed. They weren't marked by struggle anymore, but by the gentle, predictable rhythm of the seasons. The place they once called the Cursed Corral was now a thriving village, a hub of work and laughter. People spoke Ayana's name with respect, with a kind of awe. The well never ran dry. Its water nourished the gardens, the animals, and the families that had grown around it. The small cooperative of 3 women had become a guild of 20, each with her own small herd, her own skills, her own story of renewal. Wahila still made the trip from the fort, bringing ledgers and news from the wider world. She had helped them establish trade routes that reached across 3 territories. Their cheese, their herbs, their baskets, they were known for their quality, for the story woven into them. Matau was too old to make the journey from his ridge anymore, but young goat herders would bring messages from him. He always asked the same question: "Does the well still sing?" And I would always send back the same answer, every day. Suni now ran the entire smokehouse operation, her own son working by her side. My daughter, Tala, taught the younger children their letters under the shade of the big cottonwood, and my son, Cone, had become Wahila's apprentice, learning maps and trade routes, dreaming of seeing the lands to the south. Our world had grown wider, but my own days remained rooted in the simple truths of the land. I still woke with the sun. I still went to the well first, touching its cool stone rim in gratitude before I started my work. One morning I found an old, faded feather half buried in the dust by the corral gate. It was the same kind Chaiton had left tied to the post on the day he abandoned us. A sign of the curse, he had said. I picked it up, brushed it clean, and I tied it right back onto the post, not as a memory of pain, but as a symbol of what had survived it. That evening, as the sky burned with the colors of the sunset, I walked slowly through the village. Every straight fence, every healthy animal, every tended garden was proof of our shared labor. I stopped at the well. The water reflected the fiery sky. I placed my first willow basket, the one that started it all, on the stone rim beside it. Its edges were frayed, its color faded by sun and time, but it had never broken. I ran my fingers over the woven surface, remembering the night I'd found it, alone in that dark cabin. It had held our last pathetic meal. It had held our first fragile promise. You held more than food, I whispered to it. You held us. I looked up toward the ridge, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw him. Matau, standing there in the twilight, leaning on his staff, just watching, the way he always did. Whether it was a memory or his spirit, it didn't matter. I spoke the words aloud, for him, for the land. The ground remembers. The words felt as natural as breathing, as if the earth itself was speaking through me. In the distance, I could hear children laughing, a dog barking, the soft calls of the goats waiting for their evening meal. Life had become louder than loss. When night fell, the women lit lanterns all around the well, creating a circle of warm, golden light in the darkness. They began to sing, a soft old song about renewal, a melody Matau used to hum. I closed my eyes and listened. The air was warm. The ground was solid beneath my feet. And for the first time I felt a complete and total peace. The spirits had never been a curse. They had only been waiting, waiting for hands that would tend, not take. And now those hands were many. I lifted the old basket one last time, set it carefully on the stones of the well, and whispered, "We remember too." A gentle wind rose, constant and soft, and carried my voice out across the plains, as if it were delivering a message back to the very beginning. When the dawn broke, its light touched the roofs, the fences, the fields, and the faces of the people I called family. The cursed ground was finally and forever what it had always been meant to be. Home. Sometimes the things people throw away are the things that save you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the strange and the strong. And let me know in the comments, what's the one thing you've held on to that reminds you of how far you've come?